Welcome to Conway's Game of Life. We start with a grid of cells that are either alive or dead. Are you a dead cell but have exactly 3 living neighbors? Congratulations, you will be born in the next generation. Are you a living cell and have either 2 or 3 living neighbors? Congratulations, you will survive into the next generation. Otherwise, you'll die. If you have at least 4 neighbors, you'll die from overcrowding, and if you have 0 or 1 neighbors, you'll die from loneliness. And that's it. Those are all the rules you need to know to understand Conway's Game of Life. One cosmetic variation I like to add is a small indicator in the center of each cell that shows what will happen to it next generation. So a dead cell that's about to be born looks like a small seed, and a living cell that's about to die looks like a donut. Anyway, this Game of Life simulation was devised by mathematician John Conway in 1970, and it's fun to explore simple structures within it, such as still lives like the block. Notice that each of its living cells has 3 neighbors, which means they get to survive, and all nearby dead cells have no more than 2 living neighbors, so they don't get to be born, so this formation never changes. In addition to the block, other still lives include the beehive, the aircraft carrier, the loaf, the biloaf, and this formation called yeast, named by James Harford in 1971, will evolve into a bakery, a constellation of 4 loaves. In addition to still lives, we can also explore life's oscillators, like the blinker, the pulsar, which is somehow the most common oscillator of period 3 despite being so large, the clock, and the more aesthetic clock. And in addition to oscillators, we can also take a look at spaceships that translate across the board, like the famous glider, the lightweight spaceship, the middleweight spaceship, the heavyweight spaceship, the overweight, well, you get the point. Here's what it looks like when we start from random noise and run Game of Life at a larger scale. This is a 70 by 70 board that loops over. We'll color the cells based on how long they've been alive, with young cells being white, orange, and then yellow, and older cells turning green and then blue. At some point, the simulation is bound to stabilize, meaning it reaches a state it's already been in before, so it'll just loop forever onward. You might be wondering, when we do reach stability, how often does each type of still life and oscillator appear? Well, the block is by far the most common still life in Conway's universe, appearing twice as often as second place beehive and 6 times as often as third place loaf. Wait a minute, we're in a situation where the nth most common occurrence is about 1 over n as frequent as the number 1 most common occurrence? Some of you may know where this is heading. That's right, still lives in Conway's Game of Life follow the infamous ZIF distribution, just like baby names, pin numbers, and the number of times relevant XKCD comics are mentioned on Reddit. Vsauce made a whole video about why the ZIF distribution shows up so often. Anyway, back to the Game of Life. This simulation is a great example of the butterfly effect. Let's take a look at these 2 5-cell shapes, which only differ by the placement of 1 cell, and see how they both evolve. Well, the pea pentamino lasted only 4 generations before dying out completely. But what about its fraternal twin? Okay, pause right here because this shape on the left is called a Herschel because it looks like a lowercase h, and pretty soon it releases a natural glider. Let's speed up the playback to 10 times, and there will actually be 6 gliders that escape to infinity when all is said and done. These formations that take a long time to settle are called Methuselahs, named after the biblical figure who lived the longest life at 969 years. That number is actually pretty close to how long the R pentamino Methuselah takes to finally stabilize, which it does after 1,103 generations. Final population, 116 cells. So the moral of the story seems to be, Game of Life is totally unpredictable and impossible to glean useful patterns from. But that's not entirely true. On the structured side of things, life enthusiasts have used this playground to construct ever more intricate machinery, from spaceship factories, to printers, to prime number calculators, to, famously, a computer that simulates Game of Life in Game of Life, just 2,048 times larger and 35,328 times slower. Game of Life is Turing complete after all, so it can simulate any program. What's crazy about these constructions is that, although they work perfectly, if you alter a single cell within them, they will quickly devolve into chaos. So that's fun. Have we finally seen all Game of Life has to offer? Not quite. See, the rules of a lifelike universe are defined by a rule string, and the rule string for Conway's Game of Life is B3S23, where the digits after the B tell us how many living neighbors allow a birth, and the digits after the S tell us how many living neighbors allow survival. But aren't those rules kind of arbitrary? If the rules were slightly different, like say cells were also able to survive with 4 living neighbors, what different patterns would we see? To answer that question, it's time we teleport from the familiar Conway's Game of Life universe to B3S234, which I've named the Ant Colony universe. I gave it that name because of how the leading edge of growth is teeming with activity, like builder ants busy at work, but the inner parts of the structure settle down into maze-like corridors, like what you see in ant farms. So, why do corridors arise in ant colony life, but not Conway's life? Well, a common formation in corridors is the dead end. Here I've isolated 4 dead ends for analysis. Boom, 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 boom. What happens if we apply Conway's rules? Well, take a look at the living cell directly ahead of any dead end. It is required to have at least 4 living neighbors, 2 to the right and 2 to the left. So applying B3S23 rules means that cell will die, making this whole structure unstable. Whereas following ant colony rules of B3S234, this survives just fine. The cells pulsating in green are the ones who would have died from overpopulation in Conway's life, but survive here, giving us an ant colony still life. I also find ant colony oscillators so cute because they're all housed within the walls of the colony. This one has period 4 and basically cycles around a Punnett square, and this one is period 5, featuring the dreaded R pentamino as its rotor. If ant colony life is what we get when we expand the survival conditions up by 1, then what happens if we expand the birth conditions up by 1, meaning B34S23? Well, welcome to
a world on fire.
Thanks, Bo. Life in this universe expands at about the same rate as the ant colony, but this time, it just cannot settle down. To see why, recall the loaf, that still life from Conway's universe we looked at. It would be just fine here in A World on Fire, with all living cells still staying comfortably alive, but the previously overpopulated interior is now right in the birthing range, 4 neighbors, and so the loaf is eaten up from the inside, like a fungal parasite taking control of its host. This is terrifying. I wouldn't blame you if such a breadless universe makes you tremble. But even in such an alien world, there is a glimmer of familiarity, and that's T. See, in Conway's universe, this tetramino is a common predecessor of the traffic light, which is a formation of 4 blinkers. Remember when we watched the R pentamino's 1,000-generation lifespan? Along the way, it produced and destroyed multiple traffic lights, which just shows how common this T tetramino is. But what does the same tetramino evolve into in A World on Fire? Well, their trajectories start pretty similar, and surprisingly, even though it takes 11 generations longer, the T tetramino also evolves into a traffic light in AWOF. Although it's 2 tiles more spread apart, and I took advantage of the world border preventing these cells from being born. But still, when we travel to alien worlds, we have to take solace in whatever similarities we can find. So now we've seen one universe that stabilizes to a reasonable population, and 2 universes that explode into runaway growth, albeit in very different ways. Are there universes in a 3rd category that dwindle away? Why, yes there are. Say hello to B345S2, aka Blinkers, a universe documented in Adam P. Goucher's catalog. When started from random noise, this universe can keep a random sizzle going for a while, but half the time it'll eventually dwindle to just a handful of lonely blinkers, hence the namesake. And the other half of the time, it will dwindle to nothing, at least for the board size I'm using. Why does this happen? Well, the block is by far the most common still life in Conway's universe, but every cell of the block has 3 living neighbors which can't survive in blinkers. So every time an amalgamation settles into a block, it actually dies completely. Fates are even worse for its sibling universes to the south, Slow Fizzle Out and Life Light. Ignoring remnant blinkers, these universes die out even faster. But hey, at least this little oscillator survived. Back in the Blinkerverse, people have discovered surprisingly large spaceships that move 1/4 and 1/5 the speed of light, respectively. By the way, the speed of light is a term used to describe the speed of 1 tile per generation, which is the fastest any information can travel in a lifelike universe. When you're trying to build things, the larger the structure, the less likely it is to produce an exact translated copy of itself multiple generations later. Also, while editing this video, I discovered that this equal symbol becomes a whopping period 16 oscillator, which is like shockingly high for such a desolate universe. Okay, we've explored 6 universes now, but how many total lifelike universes are out there in the cosmos, and what do they all look like? Well, why don't I just show you? Welcome to the Conway Multiverse. Here are all the possible lifelike rule strings running at once. From this vantage point, we can see thousands of rule strings orchestrating millions of cells. Many worlds struggle to stay alive for even 10 generations, quickly becoming empty voids of lost potential, while many others can't keep themselves from greedily multiplying to infinity, becoming hot, meaningless frenzies of flashing random noise. There might not actually be that many universes in the Goldilocks zone between the two, delicately balanced between order and chaos.
Okay, that's great and all, but you got something wrong.
What? No, I didn't.
You got something wrong. When you zoomed out, you said that was all the possible rule strings, but how many is that?
I don't know. Why is that relevant?
Well, look at the TV I conveniently placed behind us. In each universe, you could be birthed with 0 neighbors, or 1 neighbor, or 2 neighbors, etc. up to 8. You could also survive with 0 neighbors, or 1, or 2, etc. up to 8. So you see, there's 18 possible neighbor conditions, each with 2 possible choices. That gives us a grand total of 2 to the power of 18, or 262,144 lifelike universes. In your zoomed out view, we only saw 2,116. That's less than 1% of what you promised. Care to explain?
Not really. What I do care to explain is puzzles, and how much I loved them as a kid. Crossword Sudokus, especially mazes, I'm a connoisseur at those. Remember how we talked about the ant colony's corridors? It feels like we're this close to generating good mazes, but there's something about those paths that doesn't feel right. They're just not clean, branching, or rectangular enough to resemble true mazes. To fix this, let's take a trip to B3S12345, also known as Maze, and its sister universe, B3S1234, also known as Mazectric. And wow, those really are satisfying mazes that would make any puzzle expert give their stamp of approval. Maze is known to have shorter straightaways, whereas Mazectric is known to have longer ones, just like their names. But why do they do such a better job at making mazes than Ant Colony? Well, to answer that, let's look at a classic formation within mazes known as the hairpin turn. If you try drawing a maze right now, you'll find it's basically impossible to avoid including hairpins everywhere. When a hairpin turn appears in a lifelike universe, it features this cell at the end of a wall, known as a dangler, dingleberry, or inverted dead end. Following Ant Colony's rules, with 1 neighbor the dangler dies, and instead of a stable maze, we get a humiliating oscillator. But instead following Mazectric's more lenient survival rules of S1234, the dangler lives, giving us a Mazectric still life. By the way, when you see a universe's name in quotation marks, that means someone else named it, like perhaps Johann Bontes or Alan Hensel. And when you see a universe's name in parentheses, that means I named it. I know it's really hard to tell the difference sometimes, but I hope that clears things up. While I'm at it, why don't I address Cyan Carry's complaint to Yellow Carry that 99% of lifelike rule strings aren't included in my visualization? What gives? For this project, I only included rule strings whose birth and survival conditions are connected, so these are included and these aren't. In my head, connected rule strings just make more sense in the natural world, I mean, what kind of organism feels just fine with 4 or 6 living neighbors but dies at 5? Was it too lonely or too crowded? Pick a struggle, bro. So limiting the pool to just connected rule strings lowers our count from 262,144 to 2,116. We lose some iconic rule strings, like High Life and Day and Night, which are not connected, but hey, some sacrifices have to be made. But how do we lay out those 2,000 universes in the grid? Well, births correspond to the y-axis and survivals correspond to the x-axis. All universe families in this row have their birth ranges start at 0 neighbors, which can be thought of as 0 plus. All universes in this row have their birth ranges start at 1 neighbor, which can be thought of as 1 plus. And then we have 2 plus, 3 plus, and so on up to 8 plus. And the null birth. Switching the dimension, all universe families in this column have their survival ranges start at 0 plus neighbors. Likewise, these universe families have survival ranges starting at 1 plus neighbors, and then we have 2 plus, 3 plus, and so on up to 8 plus, and the null survival. So, the universes in each family have the same birth and survival start points. The x and y locations within a family tells you how high the endpoints of the ranges go. So that's why life light in the lower left corner is just B3S2, but then moving rightward increases the survival endpoint to B3S23, and then moving upward increases the birth endpoint to B34S23. And then if you keep doing that, you eventually reach the upper right corner, which as expected is B345678 the max, S23456778 the max. And that's basically it. Now you know how my Conway Multiverse is laid out, and Cyan Carry can sleep peacefully. With that explanation out of the way, let's take a look at some more maze universes. I gotta give a shout out to Mazek Trick with Mice, a rule string that adds birth at 7 to the mix. Empty cells in long straight corridors typically have 6 living neighbors, but add a mouse to the mix and neighboring empty cells go from 6 to 7 neighbors. So they get born and become the next generation's mouse, making it look like it's crawling around. By the way, the behavior of these mice in an infinite corridor exactly matches Rule 18, one of those 1D elementary cellular automatons. And that's a rule that, when started from just a single cell, creates the Sierpinski triangle. Fun stuff. I'm glad we covered mazes. It just goes to show puzzles are a great way to kill time.
But Carrie...
What?
I'm not ready to die.
And I'm not either! So that's why we should travel to the land of immortality, known in the business as life without death. This features the same birth conditions as Conway's life at 3 neighbors, but survival happens at 0, 1, 2, all the way up to 8 neighbors. In other words, once a cell is born, it is impossible to die. Small holes dot the Swiss cheese at about 19% density. Because birth at 8 isn't allowed, they'll never be filled in, just like the potholes in American city streets. Larger holes are definitely rarer, but can occur when there are no breeding sites on the border of the hole. Oscillators and spaceships, which require old cells to disappear, can't exist here. So then what can exist in this universe besides that Swiss cheese with 19% holes? Wait, I just remembered. There's a famous ladder that appears frequently in Life Without Death, which looks like a vine that grows orthogonally at 1/3 the speed of light. In larger starting simulations, ladders appear everywhere and cannot be outpaced. Usually, proving that this universe grows indefinitely, albeit in a more manageable way than chaotic rules like A World on Fire. The famous ladder even comes with a ladder runner that goes 2/3 the speed of light, like a student overtaking his mentor. But even with all those vines, maybe you find this world too safe for your tastes. No risk of death also means no thrill, no exhilarating new changes. Then let's take a trip to the Aquatic family of universes, where cells are dying all the time. Their shimmering borders will make you feel like you're underwater. So of these aquatic universes, let's first zoom into Coral, B3S45678, listed on David Epstein's most wanted list. It's definitely the most similar to Life Without Death, but no survival below 4 neighbors gives it a dynamic, breathing border that tingles with life as it slowly grows. Also in the aquatic family is assimilation, a rule that forms diamond patterns with an alternating border that reminds me of electric current. I call the universe to the left slow assimilation, since it basically arrives at the same endpoint, but it takes a lot longer to fend off the chaos before getting there. After that, we have Rotten Egg, which lies between Healthy Egg and Bacteria. Now, the Bacteria universe was named decades ago, but I decided to give the other universes those egg names just today, because they both create egg-like shapes as they're expanding. The only difference is that Healthy Egg is almost entirely solid with no cavities, whereas Rotten Egg has a ton of cavities, and well, Bacteria is just squirming everywhere. Lastly, in the Aquatic family, we have Lifeguard 2. This universe's rule string only differs from Coral's rule string by survival at 8. But that turns out to make a huge difference, allowing Coral to have large, solid swaths of living cells, whereas Lifeguard 2 can't have that, leading to Coral conquering the globe while Lifeguard 2 slowly shrivels and dies. I can only imagine David Epstein named it that because the creatures look like they're drowning into the abyss as the lifeguard's too busy to go save them. But also, I want to point out one last thing I noticed about Coral versus Life Without Death while editing. So as a refresher, orange cells are young at about 4 generations old, and blue cells are old at about 128 generations old. See how the color gradient from orange to blue can span 30 plus cells in Life Without Death, but only perhaps 5 cells in Coral? That just shows that Coral grows about 6 times slower than Life Without Death. And well, I just think it's nifty that a cosmetic change I added actually ended up providing insight on how these universes evolve. Anyway, there's so much more I could say about this Conway's Multiverse project, from other weird families of universes to the decisions I made to organize the universes in this way, but I don't want this video to run on forever, so let me know what your favorite universe was. Also, I can already hear people saying that this field of math is not as real-world useful as other math videos I made a decade ago, like the AI or evolution ones, and that may be true. But Conway's Game of Life is an obsession I've had for over half my life. Here's evidence I created a LifeWiki account, Bloonzio, in 2011, the same year I created this YouTube channel, so it just feels gratifying to finally make a video about that obsession for you all now. I want to give a huge thank you to the LifeWiki, a resource for cellular automata enthusiasts, which was the source of perhaps half of the information in this video. Also, thanks to Adam P. Goucher's catalog, Achim Flammenkamp's Top 100 Game of Life Ash Objects website, and the many other sites I browsed while researching, some of which being over 20 years old. You guys are the best. Oh, and I have some IRL news. I'll be going to VidCon 2026 this weekend in Anaheim. So if you want to see me and my brother Michael there, well, you're in luck. We're scheduled for 4 events, including 2 Crown the Creator tournaments. I'm excited. Also, I'm going to Open Sauce 2026 in San Francisco in mid-July, but unlike last year, I'm not a featured creator anymore, probably because I haven't uploaded any STEM videos since December. The dust is starting to settle on a handful of travel/corporate/logistical troubles that have plagued me for a bit that I'm not legally allowed to talk about, so hopefully more STEM videos soon. Lastly, as some of you know, I got a bachelor's degree in comp sci from Stanford in 2020. Then I started a master's but dropped out when COVID hit. Lately, in my head, I've been toying around with the idea of going back to Stanford to finish that master's. One, because while BFDI has been successful beyond my wildest dreams and I'm so grateful that it's at this place, it doesn't quite scratch that academic itch I think I still have. And 2, the world of computer science and AI has changed so much since 2021, for better or for definitely worse. I think educating myself on how this force is evolving and changing the world we're all gonna have to live in, it's just something that's really important to me and maybe a way that I could try to make the world a better place. I don't know. I don't really know what direction I'm going with this life, but I do really like making videos, and I'm in such a lucky position that there's still so many people who want to watch after 15 or 18 years. And if you want to know more what I'm doing more frequently, maybe you can check out LazyKH, because I do want to upload more just personal videos there. And that's it. So goodbye. Bye-bye.